showing the Jubilee Bible. It was recommended to me by a viewer on another video. It comes in this sleeve. I'll show this to you so that you can read the information on it if you like. On the back, it talks a bit about information like the font, size, number of pages. It is an imitation leather. I'll give you my measurements. They're a bit different than that, but not much. Actual size of the text. About the editor. Very interesting story there. And here's the ISBN. Let's see if we can get that in focus. Alright, so much for the sleeve. The book itself I measure to be 9 7/16 inches tall, 6.5 inches wide, and 1 7/16 inches thick. You can see there is no gilting on it. To give you a sense for how large that is, here's a local church Bible publisher's Cameo. Cameo is a taller book, almost as thick, and not quite as wide. And here is a Thompson chain reference Bible. Kirkbride publishers. So height-wise, they're very similar. Jubilee Bible's a little shorter, but not much, and it's not quite as wide, and it's a thinner book. This is a text Bible. There are no references. Text comes in 2 columns in a verse-by-verse format. And I see you can see a glow, a yellowish glow there from the paper. Each of these columns is 60 millimeters wide. I count about 51 characters per line. What I do is I find a very closely spaced line like that and count it and do about 5 of them the same way. I counted one with as many as 54 characters. On some pages you'll have 59 lines of text per page. I believe that's probably true here on that page since there are no breaks. Page dimensions 229 millimeters tall, 151 millimeters wide, so that converts to 9 inches tall, 5.95 inches wide. The print is black and crisp, but it's not quite as bold as I would like. The margins are at the top between 9 and 11 millimeters. I'm measuring from this line to the edge. At the bottom, from a descender, say on a letter that hangs down to the edge, I get 6 to 12 millimeters. Inner margin here can be as much as 14 millimeters. It's not that much here, but at the edges it's close to that. Outer margin moves between 10 and 12 millimeters wide. The font is almost 9 points tall. It was advertised as 9 and I get almost 9. Line height is 3.47 millimeters. That's 9.8 points. And I think you would agree that that's a nice generous line spacing. It is not so compressed as to cause you difficulty when you read it. Like most verse-by-verse Bibles, verse numbers are at the beginning of each verse. The text is line matched. We'll see if we can show that to you. And you should be able to see the print on the other side moving out along the same lines. So it definitely is line matched. Words added by the translators for clarity. Oh, I'm showing you a map of Spain. That will become clear why later. Words that the translators add for clarity are in italic font. See if we can find some. There's a them. That's in italics. There's a to his burial here in Acts 8 for Stephen. But they aren't the only words that are added in italics for clarity. Another word that we'll see that's added in italics, which is actually in the text, it does represent a word in the original Greek, is congregation. Here we happen to be opening a spot. So congregation is in the Greek, but it's also in italics. And then there's a footnote to tell you what the Greek word ecclesia means. Pronouns for deity are not capitalized. I prefer that. A few translation notes appear at page bottom. We saw one earlier. Here's another. So ecclesia gets noted everywhere it appears, sometimes quite frequently on pages. And there are a few other translation notes. There's even one text note back in Chronicles. The font in these notes down at the bottom is about 7 to 7.5 points. It does not include a verse reference, so it's difficult to go back from the note at the bottom of the page up to the text. You have to skim it, scan it, and see if you can find the 4. And there, it took me a second or two to do it, but you can do it. The paper is good. Sheet thickness is 55.1 micrometers. I estimate the paper weight at about 50 GSM. It's a matte surface with diffuse reflectivity. You can see a bit of brightness through here, but you don't get that glossy look that's so disturbing when you're trying to read. The paper is, as you can see, not white. It's a light beige, hence the glow in the center near the gutter. There is moderate show-through. It is not very bad at all, and I do not find it disturbing. I'll show you that here. So here's to the reader in black. I put that over the top. You can just make it out, the T above books. That shows you how much the paper attenuates the darkness from the other pages. So here's the Old Testament. You can just make out Old Testament here. It's actually quite clear. The next page. As we mentioned, it's a text Bible. There are no references. There is very little print non-uniformity here. I don't have anything that I found that is worth showing. There are no book introductions. The book titles, as you see, are in the outside top. That's the right place for them because that makes it easy to find your spot quickly as you're flipping through the Bible. You don't have to open it widely to see the book name if the book name is printed in the center. Page contents are on the outside tops as well, so right next to the book title. The page numbers are on the inside top, and you rarely need to refer to a page number, so that's fine. There are no headings. Chapters are divided not by having the chapter number in large letters over here in at the beginning of the first verse, but rather the whole book name and the chapter number are squeezed in between the two chapters. So chapter 13 of 1 Samuel is here. This is the first verse of 1 Samuel 14. Books do not always begin on a separate page, and in fact I think it's somewhat unusual for them to do so. 1 Samuel does, Ruth does not. So Ruth begins where Judges ends. That's much more common here than having them start on a separate page. The book titles vary in style. Let's go to the minor prophets, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Here's Daniel. The book title for Daniel is The Prophecy of Daniel. Go a few more pages along, and we have the prophecies of Hosea. What did we have for Joel? The prophecy of Joel. So we're back to singular. Amos is the prophet Amos. How curious. And the prophecy of Obadiah. Prophecy of Jonah, the prophecy of Micah. I haven't looked into the original Hebrew to see if this reflects something there, but you have the prophet Nahum, the prophet Habakkuk, and then just plain Zephaniah. No prophecies of, no prophecy of, no the prophet Zephaniah, the prophet Haggai, the prophet Zechariah. So that's kind of interesting. And another thing you'll notice is just like in a typical King James verse-by-verse Bible, the paragraphs are indicated by pilcrows. At the end of the Bible text, we have a Bible dictionary. The dictionary is 32 pages long. It comes in 2 columns with the words in about an 8.5 point font. So, Bible Dictionary of Proper Names in Scripture. It's a very interesting note at Jehovah, which essentially explains why they use the Lord here in this edition. You can freeze this and read that if you like. Most of the Bible dictionary is just a simple gloss, a rapid English indication of the meaning of the word. After the Bible dictionary, we have a concordance. It's a limited, truncated concordance with only certain important words in it. I'll show you what those are. It's 172 pages long and 2 columns, as you see. Rather than having a context line with the word in bold, the word is given at the start of the list of references, and so you just have to find it yourself by looking. But instead of just a context line with just a few words, it gives you the entire verse, rather like the Thompson chain reference does. The words in the heading also are accompanied by the number of occurrences. So we have 58 occurrences of Almighty listed there. So 172 pages of that concordance. And at the end of that, we have a single sheet that's papery on one side and sort of a synthetic vinyl-like material on the other. It's imitation leather. It's a paste-down construction with a synthetic liner. The binding is sewn, and it's visible if we look between Genesis 9 and 10. I should be able to show you the thread. I trust some of this video you're seeing it. You surely are seeing that. We'll edit it to make it shorter. The book does not lie open in Genesis. I'm holding it open here. I let go. It collapses. You have to get in fairly deep. I did break this in the librarian-approved way, but you get to about Leviticus before it will stay open by itself. In the center, the text does tend to drop away into the gutter. So you can see the curvature here, and the only way to deal with that if you're an older person and you want to read flat is to manipulate the book so that the page you're looking at does lie flat. There is a single brown ribbon marker. It is 7 millimeters wide. That's about 1/4 inch, 302 millimeters long. It's just long enough to be used effectively here at the corner. It'll pull out and have a little bit of ribbon left over for you to grasp here at the edge. Unfortunately, it was put in a bit crooked at the top, crookedly. I think you can see that it actually wants to extend at that angle rather than straight out. That's a simple matter to repair, however, not a major issue. Certainly on an inexpensive Bible like this one, I think I paid about $18 for it. It's the sort of minor issue that you might expect to have. So now we're back in the front of the book. It's the title page, Jubilee Bible, from the Scriptures of the Reformation. So it's a Reformation Bible from the Scriptures of the Reformation by Aneco Press in Abbotsford, Wisconsin, United States of America. The copyright page, copyright 2013, Russell M. Stendal, printed in the United States of America. Printed quite well for a book printed in the United States of America. ISBNs are shown here again, and mine is second printing. You can order it from here. You can order it from Amazon as well, like I did. Books of the Bible and the contents page, the Old Testament, the New Testament. If you hear a scratching noise, that's my cat trying to get in. It's the Jubilee Bible from the Scriptures of the Reformation. It is translated from the original text in Hebrew and Greek into Spanish by Casiodoro de Reina. Pardon my inability to trill my R's. I have a lazy American tongue. And it's compared with the revision of Cipriano de Valera. It's based on the New Testament of these gentlemen, and the Psalms of this gentleman, and the Psalms of that gentleman, translated from the Spanish into English by Russell M. Stendal, compared with Tyndall, and his work in the Pentateuch, his work Joshua to 2nd Chronicles, also compared word for word with the Authorized Version. And we'll take a look, we'll compare it with the Authorized Version in places. So To the Reader gives you some of the history, the background of it. My understanding is that De Reina was a monk in Spain, became exposed to Lutheran ideas, went to Geneva, where he found things a bit too oppressive, and eventually became a full-fledged Lutheran. And he was a Lutheran at the time the translation was made. But any of this you want to read, just pause. After the section on To the Reader, you have translator's notes, and I'll let you read them. There's one on charity. That's the way they translate the word in 1 Corinthians 13. Congregation. On eternal, which he says the secondary meaning is unlimited time. The first has to do with quality. Sheol and Hades, the shofar. You'll see shofar in here with ram's horn as a note at the bottom of the text, a translation note. Italics, words added by the translator either for proper English or for clarification, and as we saw, italics is also used for the word congregation. Then they do retain thou, thee, thy, and ye, and they give the archaic verb endings for those, but second person pronouns like he, the verbs have modern endings to them. We have an editor's note, and they explain some of the things we've already seen, of why they use the Lord instead of Yahweh or Jehovah, the use of italics and or brackets. And after the editor's notes, you come to the title page for the Old Testament. Okay, I have it zoomed in now on the text in Revelation chapter 2, and the line spacing, as we've already indicated, is very generous. That's easy on the eyes. I think left-right wise, it's also very nice. The characters are not squishing into each other. No collisions there. There's decent word spacing, but not a lot of white space between the words. So that all works out well. Now I'm going to try to bring over the font text from the Cambridge Cameo so that we can compare the two. And they're comparable in size, I think. Let me look at the screen to see what you're seeing. Jubilee Bible is a bit larger. The Cameo, of course, is printed more darkly, more boldly. Cameo does have poor line spacing. I really wish that they would improve that at some point. Here's one that should be comparable in size. This is the Cambridge Concord. Both of these are King James Bibles, but the Jubilee Bible is rather like a King James Bible, so I think it's appropriate to compare them. So here is the Concord on the right. Concord is a bolder print. Right, and one last one. Actually, the paper and the print here reminded me quite a lot of what I saw in the Revised Standard Version Second Catholic Edition. So although from a philosophical, theological point of view, these may be rather different Bibles, I think from the point of view of font and paper, they're very close. So this is Revised Standard Version, Second Catholic Edition on the right. Try to stop moving things around and get them flat. Jubilee Bible on the left. Next we'll take a look at a few places to compare the Jubilee Bible with the King James Version. And it is rather similar to the King James Version. Here in 2 Corinthians 6, verses 11 through 13, which is one of the passages that I consider somewhat obscure in the King James Version, the Jubilee Bible is almost identical. The only difference I notice is the order of the punctuation, the comma, and the parentheses there in verse 13. Another passage I find somewhat obscure in the King James Bible is Galatians 4, 17 through 18. Here you have them side by side on this chart, and I think what we'll do is we'll let you read the Jubilee Bible silently while I read the King James Bible out loud. They zealously affect you, but not well, yea, they would exclude you, that ye might affect them. But it is good to be zealously affected always in a good thing, and not only when I am present with you. I certainly think the Jubilee Bible makes a bit more sense of that passage. Here's Isaiah 9, 1 through 3. King James reads, Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation, when at the first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea, beyond Jordan and Galilee of the nations. The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined. Thou hast multiplied the nation, and not increased the joy. They joy before thee according to the joy in harvest, and as men rejoice when they divide the spoil. Again, I think the Jubilee Bible has clarified things a bit. I started reading through the two translations side by side in Daniel, and I noticed a few things. In verse 10 of Daniel 1, the Jubilee Bible replaces the King James worse liking with more downcast, which certainly is more clear. But it retains Melzar in verse 11. Modern translations give the steward there for Melzar. It replaces pulse from the King James Version with vegetables, but it retains countenances, and I like countenances. I think that's a good, useful English word. In chapter 1, verse 17, it's interesting that the Jubilee Bible replaces children from the King James Version with young men. That's probably more accurate. Here, in verse 18, the King James says, Now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in. The Jubilee Bible says, Now at the end of the days after which the king had said he should bring them in, which I think is a bit more clear. And then in verse 19 it says the king communed, just like the King James Version. And I really like retaining words like that. I like the richness of the vocabulary. The Jubilee Bible retains archaic expressions in other places as well, like here in Genesis 11:3, and they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. I've always liked go to from the King James Version. In Genesis 18, where the King James Version has plain, the Jubilee Bible has terebinth trees, like most modern translations. A notable characteristic of the Jubilee Bible is that it uses the word slave for servant, for the word that's normally translated servant in other translations, in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. In Acts 2:19, the Jubilee Bible retains the British spelling for vapour, which I think is another indication of the influence of the King James and Tyndale translations. Here in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 and 12, the Jubilee Bible punctuates verse 12 with the modern translations, so that it reads, For the perfecting of the saints in the work of the ministry. That's why you have these officers, is so that you can perfect the saints to do this ministry work. And I really think the sense is, and I prefer the punctuation in the older translations like the King James Version, Revised Version, American Standard Version, where one of the things that the officers do is perfect the saints. Another thing these officers do is the work of the ministry. I think that's what's intended. Here in 1 Corinthians 6:18, the Jubilee Bible, like the King James Version, reads, "Flee fornication." So they haven't replaced that with sexual immorality like the New King James Version does. We saw earlier that the Jubilee Bible puts the word congregation in italics, even though there is a Greek word to represent the word congregation. Similarly, here in Matthew 27:32, you'll see that the word cross is an italic font, even though there is a word there that is representing the word cross, from which the word cross has been translated. If you look at the note down below, it gives you the Greek word which has been translated. One of the words that the translators decided to transliterate is shofar in the Old Testament, so you'll see that in the text. And then if you look at the footnote, it will tell you that that is a ram's horn. The Jubilee Bible has virgin at Isaiah 7:14, and here at Isaiah 14:12 it retains Lucifer. Earlier I mentioned that I had found at least one textual note, that is a note related to the source text being translated, and it's here in 2 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 2. Ahaziah was 42 years old, another text 22. That's the only one I've found. That doesn't mean that there aren't others. Here in 2 Samuel 21:19, where the King James Version inserts the brother of Goliath. Elhanan slew the brother of Goliath, but the brother of is an italic font. The Jubilee Bible strikes out those translator-supplied words and leaves it as it is in the Hebrew. I was curious which edition of the Textus Receptus was being followed, since this is a Reformation-era translation, and as best I could tell, it follows the Scrivener text, the same text behind the King James Bible, everywhere except here in Revelation 16:5. I didn't check every place, I just spot checked half a dozen locations. But here, where the King James Version has, which art and wast and shalt be, the Jubilee Bible has, O Lord, who art and wast the Holy One, which agrees with Stephen's 1550. And shalt be, I believe, is a conjecture that Beza made in his 1598 edition of the Textus Receptus. So here, the Jubilee Bible has gone back to an earlier edition of the Textus Receptus. We will close the video now with a brief summary. This has been a review of the Jubilee Bible from the Scriptures of the Reformation. On the plus side, it is a well-made book. It has good, heavy paper, minimal show-through. I wish the print were a little darker, but it's nicely done, uniform, crisp characters. It is a sewn binding. The translation is a historically interesting one, and translation into English of a Spanish translation done in the Reformation era. It does include readings unique to the Textus Receptus, like here the Comma Johanneum is included in the text. So I think a lot of people that use the King James Version might find this helpful, particularly as giving you a second sense for perhaps obscure translations, say back in the Old Testament, where the King James Version can occasionally get a bit obscure. On the downside, the cover, I think, is a bit too stiff in the hinges, and so you have to use a hand to hold the Bible open and manipulate it. But apart from that, it's a very good text Bible, no references. but a very good and useful and interesting supplementary translation. Well, I want to thank you for watching. Thank you very much for your time. If you haven't already done so, and you would like to subscribe to the channel, please feel free to do so. And also, if you did like the video, remember to hit the like button. Thanks very much for watching.